General Hospital spoilers for the week of May 12 to 16 reveal that Emma once believed that justice in the academic world was inviolable, that if she studied hard, followed the rules, maintained her professional ethics, and told the truth, eventually, all her efforts would be rewarded. But that belief began to crack in the worst possible way when she discovered signs that her important research paper had been deliberately tampered with. At first, it was just an unsettling feeling when she noticed mismatched numbers, then irregularities in the edited data analysis files. She suspected someone was trying to sabotage her. But she never imagined it would be Jocelyn, the person who had stood by her through her hardest times, the one who once claimed they were allies in a world full of pressure and challenges. This discovery was not just a personal betrayal, but a complete overturning of everything Emma thought she knew about friendship, honesty, and the limits of ambition. As Emma quietly dug deeper, tracing every save file, login, and edit trail, all the pieces of the puzzle began to fit perfectly, exposing an undeniable truth. Jocelyn had altered the key data in Emma's paper and sent it to Professor Dalton, not to help, but to undermine Emma. And what chilled Emma to the bone even more was the motive behind the action. Jocelyn didn't just want to surpass her academically, she wanted a more special position, a deeper connection with Dalton, the professor, the mentor. And now the center of a tug-of-war of power and allure. Every touch, every loaded look, every soft-spoken but irresistibly captivating word Jocelyn directed at Dalton now replayed in Emma's mind like a series of carefully calculated moves. Jocelyn was no longer just a smart, ambitious student. She was systematically building her position by tearing down others and seducing the most powerful figure in the academic world. Dalton, despite trying to maintain distance, was subconsciously drawn into her game. Jocelyn didn't confront with logic or academic prowess, she manipulated emotions, exuded carefully crafted charm, and used gestures that crossed the line of professionalism. Emma could feel the atmosphere change every time Jocelyn entered the room. She made everything feel twisted, the way people looked at Emma, the way Dalton approached academic matters. The tension between Emma and Jocelyn, which had been simmering for a long time, had now turned into a covert, brutal battle. No more polite greetings. No more knowledge exchanges like before. Instead, there were scrutinizing glances, wariness, and an ever-widening gap with cold, venomous hostility. Emma felt as if she were falling into a nightmare, where every value she once believed in was being distorted by invisible hands. She no longer felt safe in the environment where she should have thrived. She wasn't sure she could stand firm when her adversary was so cunning, so adept at manipulation, and so good at hiding behind the mask of a model student. Every day that passed, the pressure weighed heavier on Emma. Not only because her research had been stolen and distorted, but because isolation was slowly setting in. Those who once supported her now lavished praise on Jocelyn. Trusting looks had turned into suspicion. Even Dalton, who had always acknowledged Emma's ability and hard work, was now beginning to distance himself. Emma knew this wasn't a coincidence, it was the result of a covert campaign, a power struggle built on burying others with a smile and fake sweetness. Jocelyn was rewriting every story, and Emma was the chapter erased from that book. But Emma wasn't the type to back down. The rage and sense of betrayal became the fuel for her to start uncovering everything. If Jocelyn was using underhanded tactics to gain the upper hand, Emma would use her intellect and determination to expose the truth. She knew this would cost her a lot, perhaps her peace of mind, perhaps the relationships she had once treasured, even her academic standing. But if she did nothing, if she allowed the falseness to win, she would lose not only her dream but herself. Deep down, Emma understood this fight wasn't about getting her paper back or winning a professor's attention. It was a fight to protect the truth in a world increasingly overshadowed by illusion. To affirm that those who don't resort to underhanded tactics still deserve recognition, and most importantly, to stop someone like Jocelyn from climbing to the top by stepping on others. The tension between the two of them had now transcended academia. It had become a quiet earthquake, and once it erupted, Port Charles would never be the same. Sidwell is returning with a plan that is more calculated, dangerous, and bold than ever, a plan in which he's no longer acting alone. In a shocking turn of events behind the scenes of Port Charles's power struggles, Sidwell has forged a strategic alliance with Drew, once a victim, once an outsider, but now a key player in a scheme to tip the balance of power. This collaboration, disguised as a legitimate financial reinvestment project, is, in reality, a series of actions to manipulate the market, control the media, and push back the influence of the biggest names at the top, including Sonny. Drew, after a series of personal wounds and betrayals, especially from Nina and Portia, has entered a phase of rebuilding his reputation and power. But instead of choosing a transparent path, he's been drawn into the sweet promises of Sidwell. Power without explanation, wealth without proof, and absolute control that no one can trace. Sidwell doesn't just provide resources, he offers data, networks, and most importantly, political leverage that could isolate or sink any character in Port Charles overnight. The partnership between Sidwell and Drew is more than just a business deal. It's a deliberate move to dismantle Sonny Corinthos' dominance, the man they see as the last symbol of an old power that needs to be replaced. Sidwell knows that Sonny isn't just strong because of money or social power, but because of the loyal network extending from City Hall to the waterfront. That's why Sidwell and Drew are not confronting him head-on. They're playing it like the best players do, quietly severing financial routes, collapsing business alliances, and sowing doubt within Sonny's most loyal followers. Sonny begins to feel the strange signs, his closest partners pulling out without warning, sudden freezes on investments, baseless rumors circulating from local media, and most notably, the cold distance from those who once stood by him. At first, he thinks it's just a dangerous string of coincidences. But things become clearer when he realizes that all the trails lead to one name, Sidwell, and standing beside him, no one else but Drew. What angers Sonny isn't just Drew's betrayal, the man he supported after his release from prison, the one he trusted to share the goal of protecting Port Charles's stability, but how Drew has turned his personal rage into a tool for destroying everything Sonny has built over decades. A disaster is looming, not from bombs or bullets, but because the financial and informational networks are being manipulated to drive Sonny into total isolation, both in the criminal world and in politics. Sidwell, with his calm demeanor, begins to move like a predator, using Drew as the most important pawn. But what he didn't anticipate is that Drew, even in his anger and thirst for revenge, still holds on to ethical limits that haven't been completely broken. And when Drew realizes that the plan not only makes Sonny lose everything but also drags Willow, Carly, and innocent people into danger, he begins to hesitate. But will that hesitation come in time? As Sidwell has already gone too far, and the storm they've stirred is pulling all of Port Charles into an impending financial and political disaster no one can foresee? This new story proves that a major shift is taking place, a new era where old values are torn apart, where those once symbols of morality become the wielders of knives, and where power no longer lies in the hands of the strongest, but in those who know how to play the dirtiest games. Sidwell and Drew are rewriting the rules, but in a city like Port Charles, where resistance always has a chance to rise from the ashes, who will truly control the game? And will Sonny, in his moment of losing everything, find the strength to strike back mercilessly? A disaster is taking shape, and no one can remain on the sidelines. Kai is entering the fiercest battle of his life, a battle not with visible enemies that can be defeated with fists, but with his own body, with his crumbling faith, with the fear of being consumed by something he can no longer control. After a surgery that seemed like the key to a new hope, everything began to unravel faster than anyone could have anticipated. The intense pain, the signs of recovery that didn't align with the prescribed protocol, and the doctor's stunned gaze at the imaging results, everything pointed to the same undeniable reality: the surgery had failed. But what made it even crazier was that Kai refused to accept this. He tried to pretend, forcing himself to smile, to stay upbeat as if his body were still whole. He refused to admit that everything was falling apart. Not because he was foolish, but because he was too terrified to face the truth. During this time, Trina began to feel the change. No longer were there Kai's resolute gaze and hopeful voice. Instead, There was evasion, a cold shell he used to hide his despair. Kai became unpredictable, sometimes talking about future plans, sometimes falling silent for hours, withdrawing from the world. Trina knew something was wrong, but the more she tried to reach the truth, the farther she was pushed away. And then one afternoon at the hospital, when she entered Kai's room without knocking, she found him gritting his teeth, holding back pain, unable to lift his right arm, the arm that had once been his pride, a symbol of strength, of resilience, of everything he had built through sheer effort. In that moment, Trina understood, it was no longer doubt, but a harsh truth. Kai was hiding his failure. And not just a medical failure, but the complete collapse of the person he had once been. Dreams, ambitions, everything was falling apart layer by layer, leaving behind an enraged, pained Kai more dangerous than ever. Because when someone like Kai, once strong enough to make no one doubt him, falls into a state where he has nothing left to lose, he can do anything, even the most reckless things. The eruption began when Kai refused all rehabilitation plans. He started adjusting his medication on his own, secretly contacting unidentified doctors, searching for unproven treatments, even considering illegal options. Trina protested, begging him to reconsider, but Kai no longer listened to anyone. He plunged into a dangerous spiral. Not only for himself but also for Trina, the only one still by his side. And this is what made their situation an emergency. They were not just in a fractured relationship but in a medical and psychological crisis that could lead to disaster if no one intervened. Trina was caught between two unacceptable choices. Stay with Kai, trying to save him as he plunged deeper into darkness, or withdraw before she was dragged down into the same abyss. But whether she stayed or left, she knew this was no longer a passing crisis. It was a turning point. A point of no return. And Kai, if he refused to face the truth, might be the one to destroy himself, and drag Trina down on that crazy journey. Kai's battle was no longer on a hospital bed. It had gone beyond the realm of medicine and had become a psychological maelstrom, where he had to fight not only the physical pain but also his very identity, which was slowly rotting from impotence and failure. And within that chaos, Trina realized that unless they found a stopping point, a glimmer of hope, what awaited them was not recovery, but a true catastrophe. Lulu was going through a process of rebirth, not in a gentle or bright way, but in a fierce, bitter, and haunting manner. The long months of coma had stolen not only time but also memories, the opportunity to become a mother, the ability to protect a child who could have been her own flesh and blood. And now, as she slowly reconnected with reality, the awakening didn't come like a refreshing rain but as a wildfire burning away everything that remained from before. Her mind was a tangle of fragmented memories and a present swirling with doubts. As more and more evidence emerged that Gio, the teenager she had once been inexplicably drawn to, might be the son she had never been allowed to know. What started as doubt gradually turned into obsession as Lulu recognized the traits in Gio that made her heart tighten, the look in his eyes that reflected Dante when he was young, the silent determination she herself had, the invisible isolation he carried like a shadow, as if he belonged to this world but was connected to no one. These feelings were no longer just a woman's hunch after waking from a long sleep, but crystallized into a terrifying truth waiting to be exposed. And that truth made Lulu change. She was no longer a silent observer. She began searching, asking, digging, revisiting forgotten pieces. Confronting those she loved most, people she had once believed had done the best for her while she was unconscious. But then Lulu discovered that what they called the best was actually a series of lies built on fear and calculation. Brooke Lynn, the woman she had once seen as a sister, was the one who might have known the truth early on but chose to stay silent. Dante, the man she loved, the father of the child she had carried before everything fell apart, now looked at her with eyes full of regret. And Ned, the man who always intervened in family matters, might have known but stayed quiet for the sake of stability. These people might have decided for her, hiding the child, or at least never attempting to bring him back when Lulu woke up. To them, Lulu was a memory, a burden, a complication to be hidden so that their fragile present wouldn't be destroyed. But Lulu was no longer the fragile woman she had once been. The years of loss, the broken memories, and the pain of being separated from her son without knowing it had transformed her into someone entirely different. A Lulu now explosive, sharp, decisive, a mother returning to reclaim what was rightfully hers. Every step she took now sent ripples through the very foundations of the family. Of relationships standing precariously on shifting sands. Her internal transformation was no longer about emotion, it was motivation. She didn't simply want to know the truth. She wanted to tear apart all the secrets, forcing everyone to face the consequences of the silence and the calculations they had justified as love. And in that search, Lulu not only unearthed memories of Gio but also brought to light the fears that everyone wanted buried. The memories of Lois secretly taking the boy. Of Brooke Lynn visiting the orphanage then suddenly backing out, of documents being blurred, of why Gio didn't carry the Falconeri or Quartermain name, everything pointed to one thing. Joe's existence had never been accidental. He had been hidden from Lulu, wrapped up in promises like, "We'll tell you later, wait for the right time, when things are stable." But that right time never came, because no one had the courage to face Lulu when she woke up. No one wanted to witness her collapse again. But no one expected that the hiding would be what brought her to her knees. Now, as the truth about Gio was on the brink of exploding, Lulu stood at a crossroads where there was no turning back. If she moved forward, she might reclaim her son, but she could also destroy everything she had once loved. If she stepped back, she would lose forever, not just her son, but herself. She could feel the change inside her reaching its peak, where there was no room for blind forgiveness, where love was no longer enough to soothe the betrayal. She understood that every transformation happening was not just in her mind but was pushing the entire Quartermain family, Dante, and Port Charles into a new cycle, one where no secret could remain hidden much longer. A new era was beginning, with Lulu at its center. She was no longer the victim. She would redefine the truth. And when that truth was fully revealed, everything once stable would be upturned, and those who thought they could control the fates of others would have to pay the price. Because the adjustment Lulu was bringing wasn't about acceptance, it was a declaration of war on everything that had been concealed. Portia was facing an unavoidable earthquake. A brutal and dangerous adjustment beyond anything she had ever faced. On the outside, she still kept up the facade of a serious doctor, a loving mother, a woman full of discipline, but inside, the undertow of the truth was beginning to sink everything. After weeks of hiding, lying, and dealing with the anxiety of being found out, the thing Portia feared most finally happened. Drew knew. He knew that it was she who had partnered with Nina to drug him in an attempt to control his mind and actions, not only to neutralize him but also to make him lose credibility. Become more easily manipulated, and more vulnerable than ever before. For Drew, this discovery wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was a direct strike at everything he had been trying to rebuild after reintegrating into life in Port Charles. The feeling of being controlled, seen as a pawn by those he once considered allies, sent Drew into a state of emotional turmoil. But what made it even crazier was that Drew didn't explode in anger immediately. He quietly began gathering more information, regaining control, and gradually pushing Portia to face the brutal consequences of her own decision. Meanwhile, Portia realized that every layer of deception she had carefully built was cracking. She had once thought that by helping Nina control Drew, she would maintain peace, protect Trina, and safeguard the future she had once imagined. But she had been wrong. Every small action she took, from providing drugs to Brad Cooper, to covering up when asked about Drew's unusual symptoms, was now becoming evidence against her. And now, what she feared most wasn't being fired or prosecuted. What she truly feared was losing her honor, losing her power in her own family, and more importantly, losing Trina forever if she was exposed as the manipulator. Nina, Portia's only remaining ally, was now beginning to waver. Because Drew not only knew about Portia, he had started to suspect Nina was the one pulling the strings from the beginning. Nina's control, once a sharp and effective weapon, was now backfiring. She saw Drew change. No longer the predictable, easily led man, now every time Drew smiled, Nina felt as though a cold knife was cutting deep into every plan she had tried to keep secret. She knew Drew was waiting for the moment to flip the board, and when that moment came, none of them would be spared. What made this situation even crazier was the way the three of them, Portia, Nina, and Drew, were sliding into a vortex with no way out. Each of them held secrets that could destroy the other. Each of them knew that if one fell, the other two couldn't exist as they once had. And that was why the silence between them, the defensive gazes, the smiles filled with hidden meaning, became stabs that didn't need knives. Portia began living in constant fear. Worried Drew would expose everything to the media, or worse, use the information to force her to continue obeying his will. But what she hadn't anticipated was that Drew no longer wanted to punish. He wanted to use her. And that put Portia in a state of double manipulation, both pressured by Nina and manipulated by Drew. The biggest adjustment now wasn't from the outside, but from within Portia herself. She began to realize she had gone too far. What had started as helping had now turned into complicity. And now, every day she woke up, she lived in a dual reality. On one hand, the life of a savior doctor, and on the other, the hand of someone who had poisoned a man with no personal grudge. The explosion was no longer hypothetical. It was getting closer. Second by second, minute by minute, like a ticking time bomb that everyone could hear but no one knew when it would go off. When Drew decided to flip the game, not only Portia or Nina would pay the price, but the entire fragile power structure in Port Charles could collapse. And when that happened, no one would be able to return to the way things were. No more control, no more trust, no more safety. Only consequences, losses, and the raw truth that in this game of power, the winner isn't the one who hides best, but the one who dares to burn everything down to start again from the ashes. Jason Morgan. The man who once walked silently through the darkness with the resolve of a warrior and the heart of a father, is now entering a new chapter of his life, a chapter not opened by violence or loyalty, but by an increasingly consuming obsession with control, responsibility, and a son who is slowly slipping out of his grasp. Jason's new story of control is not simply about his return to Port Charles after a period of disappearance, not just about his struggle to regain the trust of those who once loved and respected him, but a quiet, obsessive journey to protect Danny, a boy growing up amid forces that Jason can no longer fully control. In the eyes of others, Jason is still the tough, taciturn man, acting faster than he thinks. But behind that exterior, Jason is undergoing an unnamed inner turmoil. Realizing that Danny, the son who was once his only hope to believe he could live a different life, is changing. Not merely the changes of adolescence, but a shift in direction, in values. In the influence of forces Jason has spent his entire life fighting to keep away from his son. Danny, quietly but unmistakably, is becoming cold, mysterious, closed off, traits Jason knows all too well because he was once that way. What makes this all the more haunting is that Jason realizes he is no longer the anchor in Danny's life. Their brief conversations are becoming stiff. Jason's questions are being evaded. And when Jason stumbles upon signs that Danny might be getting pulled into some underground network, perhaps through the influence of friends, or worse, from a force trying to use Danny to target him, the obsession inside Jason erupts. He can't let that happen. He has lost family, love, and himself before, but he can't lose Danny. Jason begins to act with extreme caution. He watches his son, intervenes in his social relationships, quietly monitors communication devices, tracks extracurricular activities, all done in silence, without explanation. Because for Jason, silence is the only way to protect. But that very silence is slowly pushing Danny away. And Jason knows that could lead them to another tragedy, one where fatherly love can't heal the wounds, where the very things Jason tries to prevent become the result of his overbearing control. Jason's new struggle for control is no longer in the criminal world, where he could resolve problems with guns, power, or loyalty. It's in a much more fragile world, the world of emotions, trust, and the delicate balance between a father and his son. And in that world, Jason is no longer the best. He doesn't know how to talk. He doesn't know how to open up. He doesn't know how to make Danny see that everything he's doing is out of love. That is what makes Jason's obsession grow stronger. He can't sleep. He loses patience. He starts to view everyone around Danny with suspicion, even the innocent ones. Because once Jason decides to protect someone, he will go to the very end. But this time, is he protecting or destroying? The change in Jason is no longer hidden. It's clear in his eyes, in his actions, in every breath he takes. He is no longer the loyal soldier who silently accepts everything. He is the father who is slowly losing the most precious thing in his life and is willing to cross every boundary to keep it. Poor Charles doesn't know that Jason is slipping deeper into a new darkness, not because enemies are threatening him, but because the love he has for his son is becoming an obsession that won't allow him to step back. And when love becomes obsession, when protection turns into control, when a father no longer knows where the limit is, what awaits is not salvation, but a painful confrontation between the past and the future, between sacrifice and consequence. Between a father and a son growing up with the heavy legacy of the name Jason Morgan.